Have you ever experienced resistance along your path of transformation and personal growth? Well, resistance is one of the biggest slowdowns and burnout issues that we can meet along the path. And in today's episode, we're going to have a jolly good look at it and how you can let it go. We're going to look at how does it show up? What's the cost of having resistance? What are the main causes? And what would life without resistance look like? Settle in, get ready, and let's get into it. Hit it, Kim.
Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. We are at episode number 71. If you're brand new and you just found us, then I welcome you with all my heart, and I'm really delighted that you found us. And if you're a regular, welcome back. You know I love that you're always here. And by the way, if you are a regular, you may have noticed that there was not an episode last week. For the first time in 70 episodes, I didn't put one up last week. It's been a mad, crazy month. In fact, lots of people I've been speaking to have found that at the beginning of 2021 has they've been in kind of super high workload mode and bunkered down, getting on with it. And I know for myself, I mean, I've got so many amazing plans that I'm really excited about for MPA in 2021. And of course, I'll be letting you know about that. And also, by the way, this week we're celebrating MPA's 14th birthday. Yes, it was MPA's 14th birthday on the 5th of February, just last Friday. And as part of that, actually, we've just launched the MPA Advanced Training. Now, I probably mentioned this to you before at some point, but if I haven't, the Advanced Training, well, the way it goes is that with MPA, first of all, if you haven't heard of MPA, it's short for non-personal awareness. And most people meet it as the MPA process, which in one sense is a simple way to stop taking things personally. Deeper than that, actually, it's one of the best frameworks I know for dropping resistance. And hence, I thought we'd talk about resistance today. And the advanced training in many ways was designed to really help change workers who are doing one-to-one work to use MPA in that context and have the experience of having no resistant clients, no resistance in themselves and no resistance in their clients, which makes for fantastic facilitation. But also there's a lot of people who will be getting advanced training because it is actually really full of sort of life lessons that relate to having a no resistance life experience. It's packed with self-development because whether you're doing a training that is for doing one-to-one work, there always is an element where it's about really looking at how resistance shows up in yourself and how you can reduce that in the context of this resistance. Plus, if you are a one-to-one worker, then there's loads of information in that course about how to work with different situations. And again, for self-development, so we look at working with emotions, working with the body, working with behaviors, the life fundamentals, birth, sex and death, working with other modalities if you use them, and abundance and working in business. But again, if you're into more self-development, which you may be if you listen to this podcast, then all of those areas are areas that show up in life. And so it shows you great ways to work with yourself in that way, because everything that I share that applies to working with, in quotes, a client, if you are your client, and most of us are for most of the time, then all of this stuff definitely applies to you. I will link it in the show notes. The show notes today will be www.beabrillianthuman.com/71 for this episode. But if you want to go direct and want to write this down, get pens and paper at the ready, you need to go to www.thenpaacademy.com/MPA-advanced-training. And you can have a look at our launch offer, which is there right now as I speak. And yeah, 14 years of MPA. It's just absolutely amazing. And by the way, if you're new and you're going like, well, MPA, I don't get what it is. Well, that video that I share up there on the show, actually in that video, I do share for the first time really what MPA is really about. I mean, if you're just interested in, where did MPA really come from? Beyond the story that I tell a lot, which is it came in answer to a prayer in a coffee shop, that was the crystallization, but the formation of it goes way, way back. I tell the full story in the video on the advanced training video there, so you can go and have a look at that if you're curious. And again, but if you're like brand new and just want to get in touch with the process or try the process out, you can go to the show notes for today or to joelyoungmpa.com. And you can download the process for free. It's a simple 6-line spoken word process. And if you're new, I talk a lot about it on this show. And if you're not new and you haven't done that, go do it. Get your hands on that sheet. You can start using it in your life right away. So today, I want to talk about letting go of resistance and go through. It is such a big deal. And I was doing actually more research for the video that I did about advanced training, and it came to light. I mean, I've known it for myself, but how much of a debilitator it is. So let's start with, what is resistance and how does it show up? So how do you recognize resistance when it shows up? Well, there is a plethora of ways that it can show up, but I've kind of broken it down to keep it simple into kind of three areas or generalized areas that I've seen it show up and recognize it. The first one is polarized positions. So I did a whole episode on embracing polarity. That's episode 60. I'll link that in today's show notes. But polarized positions or stuck perspectives is one of the ways that you kind of can see that there's resistance at play. So this is where you kind of get into some kind of argument. If it's with somebody else, it can be where you're just going round in circles. It's either my way's the right way and your way's the wrong way in some form or another. And you just end up getting stuck in it. And no one moves anywhere. And resistance creating stuckness, it really is an absence of any movement at all. So it might be an argument around, this is how it is. So an idea around the way things are. So anyone who's open to growth and movement, anywhere you find a part of you that thinks this is how it is, that's finito, end of story. Generally, that's going to be a place where resistance can show up. Or this is who I am. Again, I talk often about how MPA is identity level change. And so how we identify ourselves, saying this is who I am. If you get very stuck in an identity, then that's going to create resistance. So I am the person that never makes any money. And then you work on your abundance and then, but that identity, I'm the person who never makes any money, is always going to assert itself and throw up forms of resistance to you. Or again, if you're working with somebody else or dealing with someone else and you've got the sort of, this is what you're supposed to do. Again, it's the way, it's how it's meant to be. It's how you're supposed to do something. There's a certain way about something. Then this is somewhere, if you find yourself engaging in that kind of conversation, then it's a form of resistance because, again, you're stuck in a perspective. You have some polarized position, some polarized idea, this way or that way. There's a right way, there's a wrong way. Anywhere you get into polarity, you're in a good chance of getting stuck and into resistance. Why? Again, if you go back to Embracing Polarity, episode 60, I'll go into more detail, but in a nutshell, it really is that, when you embrace a polarity, it creates on an energetic level charge, and charge creates those magnetic forces which get things stuck. It's kind of can be, the polarities make things stuck together. Think of two magnets with opposite polarities. They stick together and it's very hard to move. And when they have matching polarities, you get that kind of monorail kind of friction-free experience. So any kind of polarization is going to be a place where you can recognize that a resistance is at play. Another place where it's a sure sign that you've got resistance going on is stubbornness. Now, there's a big difference between stubbornness and, holding a boundary, for example. Stubbornness has a particular quality about it. The classic thing is, they're putting their hooves in. If you're putting your hooves in around something, again, you're kind of in that going round in circles place. So where you find yourself stubborn, and in a way, I'm raising it because perhaps it's more obvious, it is, in a sense, an outcome of those polarized positions. In fact, most of the things come from polarization. But anywhere where you recognize some kind of stubbornness, your hooves are going in, you've got resistance that is happening. And we're going to get on to what the cost of that is. And the final area really is sort of those more behavioral responses we have when there's subtle resistances at play. So things like procrastination or avoidance, or going off into diversions. Diversions are quite interesting because, you end up doing something completely different or focusing on something else. So an example of that may be that, you have a situation where you, let's think about this. Okay, so for example, a diversion might be that you start working on a specific issue and then some childhood thing comes up and you've got an idea that it probably goes back to childhood. And while, as we would say in NPA, the animation isn't there, in other words, the signal that you're on track isn't there, you end up going down the rabbit hole of some particular childhood memory. Now, of course, sometimes it's perfect to go down looking at a childhood memory, but often we can get stuck into the diversion based on some idea of, again, back to how it's supposed to be, this is how you do it. You end up getting diverted away, but resistance is sort of a harbinger of diversion and avoidance, because ultimately if you're not looking at where the resistance comes from, then you can end up going around in circles. Plus, going back to this is who I am, the identification. Again, one of the great things with non-personal awareness and MPA overall, working at the identity level, is because, identity is the master puppeteer. If you have an I am in there somewhere, I am this, I am that, in a sense, it's like that master puppeteer. It's like an identity, an entity inside of you, which has an investment in surviving and has a whole host of creative ways of, shifting around or moving around the beliefs and the emotions and the behaviors, as long as it keeps itself in place. So if it can get you going down off a sidetrack, chasing a red herring, then fantastic. So you find yourself in a place of doing avoidances, diversions, or procrastinations in some form, then you know that resistance is at play. So then what is the cost of resistance? Again, it's amazing. Resistance seems so normalized. It's like we think it's just part of life, and it can even be a good thing. And I suppose there are times when, in the subtlety of resistance, there can be a time where it's showing something, and I'm going to get into that later. But really, there is a huge cost to leaving resistance unlooked at, not let go of, really. I mean, in terms of, if you're listening to this show, then there's a good chance that you're absolutely interested in personal growth, into becoming more, into growing yourself and becoming that brilliant human. And one thing's for sure is that resistance absolutely slows down that path of transformation. In a way, it can completely limit your potential, and it can even halt transformation completely. So if there's a place that you find you're not growing, it's probably resistance in there somewhere that is causing it to sort of to cap off at a certain point. And the other thing about resistance is it takes a hell of a lot of energy. It's really energy intensive. In fact, when I was looking up about resistance in the world of change workers, there were some amazing studies being done on how resistance, whether they experience resistance in their clients or in themselves, is one of the biggest causes of burnout within therapists, change workers of all sorts, or certainly limits their capacity to work with sort of large numbers of people, or the number of people that can go through their practice. And also it can leads to sort of things like emotional exhaustion and those kind of things, and even to the point where people can lose their passion for the work because they're experiencing so much resistance in themselves or in their clients. So they end up sort of thinking, why the hell did I start this in the first place? Whereas when they started, they were full of passion and just really want to help people. So it takes a lot of energy. And again, within your own process, if you find that, you go through any kind of process to help yourself grow and you find yourself exhausted at the end of it, chances are there was resistance at play. Now, again, just to be really clear here, I'm not saying that, if you got resistance, you're bad. It's just that I don't think we found better ways. I mean, that's one of the things that excites me the most about the advanced training, and certainly sort of one of the things that I found more than anything else with the framework that is non-personal awareness, is that it does allow you to have a resistance-free experience. And the other cost, it's kind of a cost, but kind of a side effect, if you like, of resistance, is that we tend to create a defense story or a justification. Now, this is really interesting, and I bet you've seen it either, if not in yourself, then there's a friend or someone who's done this. They go into resistance, and then the whole story is created around why something's not possible, why they do that, what the real cause is, all of those things, but a whole defensive story. And going back to what I was saying about the diversions, this is a classic red herring syndrome, where you go into a story of something and it goes away from the original focus of that transformation and change and on to some often analytical or certainly in terms of self-development, analytical or modality-based idea of what needs to happen and all that stuff that we talked about before in the polarized positions. But again, what is the cost of creating a defensive story or a justification? Well, that's just going to perpetuate the resistance and perpetuate the loss of energy and perpetuate the slowing down or halting of any transformation. So it's very, very counterproductive. And ultimately, cost of it slowing down and halting transformation, or costing it all of it ultimately, what's that really about? Well, you embarked on some path with a strong intention to change, to improve, to grow, to release yourself from some burden. And so the cost ultimately, I guess, is that you just don't get to that place that you know and feel instinctually that you can, either as soon as is possible or worst case scenario, ever. And that's a pretty big cost. So how are you supposed to address and let go of resistance if you don't know what's causing it? Well, again, interesting, because this is where a lot of red herrings can come in, and a lot of, I guess, sort of standard dogma can be a challenge in really understanding what's going on. So and again, similarly to when I was talking about sort of how does resistance show up, there's so many different specifics. I can't address them all, but I can certainly offer you my perspective on, I guess, the three core areas that are, I guess, the sponsors of, or the place from which the resistance shows up. So firstly, let's address one of the biggest myths. Generally, the idea, especially if you're working one-on-one with someone and you meet resistance, the idea is that they don't want to change. Now, we soften that a bit, don't we? We say it's unconsciously they don't want to change. Or if you're in your, maybe you're working on yourself and you find resistance, you go, oh, bad me, I don't want to change. Because that's what it does, right? It says bad me, even if it's unconscious. Bad me because I don't want to change and I'm not clever enough, good enough, or worked hard enough to find out whatever that unconscious motivation is that I don't want to change. Well, I want to bust that myth, because nobody gets into a situation where they either with a one-to-one person helping them in a seminar, or just even reading a book or listening to a podcast, without wanting to change. We all want to change the things that we go looking to change. Whether it's unconscious or not, it's like the fact is, underneath the surface, if you entertain the idea of not wanting to change, you've lost the battle already. Not that it's really a battle, but you know what I mean. That's going to, in itself, is going to close off any idea, and certainly can incite some kind of judgment, especially if you've got that going on with your clients. Oh, that resistant client doesn't want to change. That's not the case. That just isn't the case. It's untrue. But there may be other things going on that make it appear that way, which we'll look at in a moment. So first of all, I think the biggest thing that I see is the cause of resistance. And one of the things that I probably speak to the absolute most in the advanced training program is agenda. I've certainly mentioned it at times on this show before. But having an agenda goes back to that polarized positions. This is how it's supposed to be. This is what's supposed to happen. Anywhere where an agenda comes in is instantly going to set off some kind of polarization and put resistance into work. That's why so much of that program works at helping you to drop your agenda in all sorts of different ways, in all sorts of different circumstances. But I would say that is, from my perspective, and certainly from the non-personal perspective, the number one cause of resistance is some agenda at play. Now, it may be that the agenda is coming from one of those identities. So this is who I am. I've invested so much in the fact that I am the person who doesn't attract any money. That no matter what work I do, as long as that identity is at play, then it is going to have an agenda. So you have opposing agendas inside yourself. You end up with that polarized position. You end up going around in circles. It gets full of conflict and resistance, and that's the way it can work on an inner level. And certainly, again, if you're working with any kind of client, and again, this is one of the big focuses of the advanced training, and you have an agenda, welcome to a world of burnout and resistance and hard work and possibly stuck clients. It goes the same way. So that is my number one cause of resistance, is some form of agenda at play. So just to clarify on that, I would make the distinction of, there's the global statement, people don't want to change. They've got resistance because they just don't want to change. It's very different from going, there's a part of them that is at play and has the reins in some form, which has an agenda which is causing resistance. So, again, and that can come into the second one, which is the cause of resistance, which is fear. So any form of uncertainty, or that can show up as vulnerability as well. That fear really goes back to the agenda. If there's a part that has an agenda, so that part that says, I'm the person that doesn't ever make so much money or doesn't become abundant, chances are the agenda there is the fear that something has put that in place at some point. That idea that's been taken on, allowed in, and allowed to crystallize that sense of identity, in order to protect something sacred. There's some positive intention there, and the idea for that part of letting go of that identity is that there's some risk involved. So it's got an agenda about keeping things in place for fear of the unknown or uncertainty happening. But fears can manifest in all sorts of different ways, and certainly is one of the reasons that we can go into resistance, just because we're afraid of something shifting for the worse. And the final thing is pressure. Pressure is something which, again, can create a lot of resistance. Just think about it. When someone really pressurizes you, what happens inside? If someone starts to push at you or pull at you, then you can tend to find that some form of, it's like innate resistance comes up. So any kind of pressure, pushing or pulling, where does that come from? Well, we're back to agenda. It comes from having an agenda. And so it may be that it's like, if you're working on yourself, and you're trying to do some transformation, maybe that's too much at this point, or maybe it's too soon. Or the way I would put it, and lots of what I've put out, for example, like the unconditional pivot exercise is a good example of this, is I noticed that in the pivoting exercise, and by the way, that's episode 27, I'm pretty sure I got the numbers right there, and I will link that in the show notes. But what I did there is I took a basic pivot exercise from Abraham Hicks, and I made it so that it could be done in tiny steps, because sometimes pressure comes from the steps being too big. So the whole I'm not ready right now, which is something you can say, oh, well, I'll just procrastinate or divert or avoid. If you come back to the steps I'm trying to take are too big, then you can chunk down to tiny, tiny steps and you'll find movement can begin. It takes the pressure off because pressure will often create that resistance. And again, agendas create pressure, agendas create fear, which is why there's so much about it in the advanced training program. So again, out of those things, there's all sorts of different specifics that can come on. But when you realize it's usually comes from some form of agenda, which is generating either fear or pressure or both, then you can begin to look at how to find the movement within it. With the fear, you can look at what's the part that's at play. And again, MPA, being identity level change, is fantastic for working directly with the identities to allow them to shift and open and move. And again, the work with MPA itself, being a 6-line simple process, is a pressure off process. I literally say it's not a results focused therapy. It really isn't. It's a process. It's do the word and see what happens. There's no pressure in it, no agenda in it. It's like baked in to be resistance free. So we've looked at, how resistances show up, what's the cost of them, and what are the main causes. So let's look now at what does it look like. Let's step into the world. I want you to imagine a world where you have a life without a resistance, a life with no agenda. And by the way, just to put this in here, when I say no agenda, I'm not talking about being completely passive. There are some distinctions here that need to be made. No agenda just means that there's not an attachment to a particular way, but you can have strong intention, passionate, powerful purpose. You can have confidence, you can have boundaries. All of those things are very much in there, but you can have all of those and not have an agenda. And that, in a sense, is one of the secrets to a life without resistance. So what does a life without resistance look like? Well, if I was to sum it up in a simple 2-word sentence, I'd just say life without resistance is free movement. In fact, if you go back to episode 2, which is the 5-point blueprint for growth, and again, I'll link that in the show notes today, I talk about it as a discovery mindset. Life without resistance is a life of true exploration. Literally having no agenda means you're free to move anywhere. You've got free movement in terms of your perspective, and that's going to give you flexibility. You've got an awareness of the right pace of things. And so you're going to have, without the resistance, you're going to have more energy and more passion. You're going to have that more flexibility and certainly more growth. And there's a way you can look at it from a certain perspective, I think, which is important. And I say this again without judgment, but I don't know if you come across the idea of the sort of parent, adult, child model, where basically the idea is the best place to come from when you're an adult is to come from an adult. When you get into those polarized, stuck, resistant places, we tend to merge either into the child perspective, being more of this kind of the victim or the helpless one, or the teacher perspective, the the parenting perspective, where we get teachy and sort of dogmatic about things. Whereas you'll find in a life without resistance, you're coming much more from that sort of mature adult place. Why? Because you've got that flexibility of perspective and that ability to move. Again, I use the words with MPA a lot as it helps you navigate those tricky waters. Why? Because you don't get stuck in a particular direction, which, if we use the rapids analogy, ends up smacking you into the rocks. You've got that ability to move in freedom, to be clear of sight and of mind, to see what's coming up, and then navigate beautifully and gracefully through all the boulders and blocks of life, which is what then gives you that ability to grow more and to fulfill those transformational goals that you've got. And ultimately, out of all of this, again, resistance creates stuckness. Stuckness is the opposite of movement. Anybody who is anywhere, either with themselves or helping a client or someone else, a family member even, is looking for some kind of progress. And progress is a function of movement. And the thing about movement, the thing about having even the tiniest little steps, is over time that builds confidence and it builds trust. One of the biggest reasons we don't trust ourselves, either in our practice with our clients, which there are some cases that's what happens, or within our own transformational process, we lose trust and we lose confidence because we find ourselves getting stuck again and again, and we don't see the movement and the progress that we got into this for. So a life without resistance is something which is a beautiful, onward moving, expansive, and very free, passionate, fulfilling experience of life. And that's why I'm so passionate about the advanced training program. Again, it's kind of focused on, really how to help coaches and one-to-one practitioners. It's framed in that way. But again, I strongly encourage you, if your interest is in working on yourself, there is so much in that program that will help you to have that experience of transformation without resistance. All the secrets, all the keys are in there, drilled into you over the modules of that. So do go and have a look at the video. Again, you can go to the mpaacademy.com/mpa-advanced-training, all lowercase, to have a look at that, or just go to the show notes for today, www.beabrillianthuman.com/71, and there'll be a link in there as well. So let me know what you have enjoyed about this episode. If you had any ahas, you can always get in touch with me via social media, or and I'm generally at Joel Young MPA. There, if you're a YouTuber, these things go out on YouTube as well. Then you'll know that if you're a YouTuber. Leave a comment. It's simple. There's always a post on the MPA Rocks page on Facebook. You can comment on there. So come find me, let me know, or even go to beabrillianthuman.com and hit the leave a message button. You can leave me a voice message. I'm always open, especially as we get deeper into 2021, into what you would love to hear about. Just let me know, and let me know how you found this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you go ahead and hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening to this. If you like this, then share it. Go tell someone about it. There's no better way to share a podcast than to tell someone you know and say, hey, I heard this great podcast. You can give them, just tell them to go to beabrillianthuman.com. It's dead easy. Or if they listen on iTunes or Google Play or Spotify, they can just search Be a Brilliant Human with Joel Young, and they should be able to find it there. And I appreciate all of your shares, those of you that are sharing this podcast and helping us all grow together. So that's a wrap for this week. Big hugs to you all. I hope your February's going great. Have a great Valentine's Day, which is coming up on Sunday. And make sure you go ahead and check out the MPA Advanced Training Program, especially if you're a coach, and especially also if you've got any kind of interest in supercharging your own personal growth. Big hugs, and I'll see you soon. All that remains is to cue the moo.